as we said, there's a lot been going into this, and I am so excited to get rolling, man. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get started.
Awesome.
Let's do it. Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells, where we interview top scholars and authors to help you rediscover the Bible on its own terms. The book of Job is one of the most fascinating books of the Bible as it deals with the unjust suffering of the righteous, the Satan, and even the chaos-driven symbolism of Leviathan. Today, we are going to meet with a top scholar and expert on the book of Job, Dr. Eric Ortlund. Eric received his PhD in Hebrew and Old Testament at the University of Edinburgh. He now teaches at Oak Hill College, where his research interest focuses on the books of Isaiah and Job. He is the author of several incredible books, including the sci-fi thriller I Am the Doorway, that is a dark fantasy where chaos literally walks among us. Eric is also the author of the incredible book entitled Piercing Leviathan, God's Defeat of Evil in the Book of Job. This is the book we will be discussing today. This book shows how taking Job at its ancient Near Eastern context through the lens of chaos imagery provides a more intimate and uplifting discourse between God and his faithful servant Job. Who is the Satan character? Why does God allow unjust suffering? What is the book of Job actually about? Buckle up and get ready for an exciting interview that's going to answer these questions and more as we explore the work and teachings of an incredible author and scholar. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show with me today, Dr. Eric Ortlund. I didn't even have to pipe that crowd in. They just naturally started applauding.
I'll
there.
Pay you for that introduction later. Thank you.
Well, Eric, it is an honor and a privilege to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us from across the pond.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, same. So over the past 3 months, we've talked about this. Our channel has been slowly going through an epic series tracing the theme of the chaos dragon from Genesis all the way to Revelation. We've really taken a slow, methodical approach to understanding this theme. It's been very formative for my journey and for me and my audience. And I was really, what really took a turn for me is an episode that I was listening to Tim Mackey on the Bible Project podcast. Can't recommend it enough. And he recommended your book, Piercing Leviathan. And I was just like, when I got that, a lot of things clicked for me. So your book centers in on exploring the chaos themes of Leviathan and Behemoth represented in the book of Job. So you actually feature the biblical theme of chaos in some of your other sci-fi writings as well. So before we talk about those, which I want to, open us up with some introductory remarks on how the biblical concepts of Leviathan and chaos overlap in the minds of the authors and audience of Scripture.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm very glad that's a great question. Very glad to see the unseen realm prominently displayed behind you. I think Heiser was getting at something very, very important. I think like you, part of the reason I find this so fascinating is the Bible is complicating how I look at the world. And it's showing me that God's world is more complex and there are many more factors and personalities, some of them at war, than I would be tempted to believe. I'm fascinated by Leviathan and Job and elsewhere in the Old Testament because it helps. Without that, I would believe in demons and the spiritual world and whatnot, but it would be a pretty theoretical belief.
Yeah.
I would almost be atheistic, or atheistic isn't the right word, but almost believe in the watchmaker God, where in the sense that like it just doesn't, impinge on real everyday life.
Yeah.
They're just theories. And in the most interesting way, the God is revealing that something has gone wrong with his creation, that there are powers and principalities that can only be talked about metaphorically and symbolically. Metaphorically, maybe not the right word, but symbolically, that God has got this entirely under his control, And yet there is a huge battle raging in creation.
Mm.
And especially in the book of Job, he's also saying the fact that that battle is going on does not mean that creation is a horrible place or it's not worth living or God doesn't care about his world.
Yeah.
So have you read Paul Hebert's article, The Flaw of the Excluded Middle?
No, I haven't.
It's, if you Google it, you can get a PDF. It's like maybe 9 pages long. It's written in the 80s. I've never forgotten reading that. He talks about how most Westerners tend to think of like empirical physical reality and ultimate reality, God's throne room.
Mm.
Most Westerners, that's our cosmology. And he says most other people groups will have will have three categories: ultimate reality, everyday, empirical reality, and a kind of mid-level spiritual realm
Mm.
with a lot of different, gods and ghosts and demons. And even though the Bible really pushes back against paganism and witchcraft and all those things, the Bible's cosmology, I think, is basically the same. It's just reordering it to show, an ultimate God whom no one can challenge. And he goes on to say in that article that Western missionaries have been a secularizing force in other parts of the world because they have a kind of, very long answer, I apologize.
No.
They have kind of Enlightenment, secular, materialist view of the world. They just put God up at the top.
Yeah.
So secularism and atheism has become more thinkable in Africa under the influence of Western missionaries. So all that is to say, the Bible's complicating my picture of God's world in the most fascinating way.
Yeah, and chaos and disorder does that, and I love that answer. And I think that's it's important to see how getting those elements right helps us understand where we're at within the narrative, what's out there. And it's like you said. N.T. Wright says it all the time. We don't have good language. They didn't have it back in the ancients. We don't even have it now to describe these things because they're the indescribable. And that's one thing that I love about what your other passion comes out and helps do, is because I think art has a way of describing, is the way of describing the indescribable. And this interview is focused on your awesome book, Piercing Leviathan. But as we mentioned earlier, you have some very incredible writings in the sci-fi genre as well that include biblical elements of chaos and disorder. So I wondered if you could tell us about those books, Dead Petals and The Doorway, and why you're so passionate about writing these thrillers.
So Dead Petals is a theological zombie apocalypse.
So cool.
It's my attempt to talk about the gospel to people who love zombie movies and zombie books. I'm not spoiling anything if I say toward the end of that novel, a character who's not really a human being anymore says to the main characters, "Will you lay aside this life of living death for true death and true life?"
Mm.
And within that genre, that's kind of the strongest I can say it without breaching contract with the reader and turning it into a sermon,
Yeah.
I got the idea because I'm fascinated by how the Old Testament rails against paganism and idolatry, but also will use the same genres and some of the same images and language to talk about the only true God.
Yeah.
So we hear so much about how awful Baal is and you should not worship him. But sometimes some of the same claims are made for Yahweh, that he rides his chariot across the heavens, that he's in the storm, and so on. And the Bible is not compromising its faith or lessening its view of the only God when it does that. It's speaking to ancient Semites in categories they could understand, and saying essentially, there is a great storm God, it's just you're worshiping the wrong person. So it got me thinking, if the Bible can hijack pagan genres and use them to talk about the real God, got me thinking, what if I can do the same thing?
Mm.
And it's fascinating to me. I think what a culture considers monstrous is very revealing for that culture. And the fact that we haven't been able to get away from zombies and vampires, I think that says something about us. I think vampires are basically about impurity and even ritual impurity. And I think zombies are obviously about mortality. And I think at a half-conscious level, when somebody watches a zombie movie, at a half-conscious level, they're asking, can I survive my own mortality? Can I survive the monster? Can I carve out some kind of meaningful life, knowing that death is all around me? Yeah. So when you look at a zombie in a zombie movie or TV show, you're looking at yourself, what you're going to be eventually. And I think most of the time the answer is no. Most of the time the zombies win. I think there's a deeper level. And have you seen any of the old George Romero movies from the 70s?
Give me a movie title.
Oh, like Night of the Living Dead.
Yes,
And
yes, yes, yes. When I was a kid, man.
yeah,
Yeah. I did for sure.
I'm not recommending
Yeah,
anyone watch
anyone
them.
watch?
They're
Yes, but I
horrifying.
do remember. I remember
Yeah,
being quite terrified actually.
yeah. So in those movies, you start to get Romero is just really perceptive. Like I wish I could have sat down with my Bible and a cup of coffee with him because I think
Yeah,
he's asking a lot of the right questions.
yeah,
You get the humans and the zombies starting to mimic each other. The humans act in increasingly mindless, rapacious ways, and the zombies act in these eerily human ways.
mm,
And so my another long answer, I apologize. My theory is that in a horror movie, we tend to identify with all the characters,
yeah,
with the bad guy and the survivor. And I think zombie movies can be a half-conscious attempt to try to recognize something about ourselves,
yeah,
to try to admit without fully thinking it because it's so overwhelming and terrifying. There is something inside me that is dead and mindless and just consumes and consumes, and I'm never full. And can I survive that? Can I retain my humanity or not? I think that's a great question. That's an
yeah,
awesome question. The
yeah,
gospel is just primed for that kind of question.
yeah,
So Dead Petals is my attempt. So a genre is a contract between author and audience, and I can't break contract. I have to keep it a fiction story. I can't preach at people. But it's my attempt to say that it's my attempt to try to talk about the gospel in that genre.
yeah,
And besides, I mean, Paul says we were dead in sins and trespasses, right?
yeah, yeah.
So there's got to be theological potential there.
No,
I think a lot of horror stuff I don't watch, I don't read just for conscience's sake, and Philippians 4:8 and so on. But I think it's the genre with the most theological potential and a really promising way to build bridges and give the gospel traction with very secular modern Westerners.
yeah, and you opened up with that answer, which I love, talking about how the biblical authors utilize that's those same themes, and like even Leviathan was the ancient horror story of its day. It was the horror genre of its day, and
Yeah,
the biblical authors regularly implemented that notion to show that it's not scary to God. Like even when he talks about playing with Leviathan and all the things, but at the same time that they utilized it and they weren't afraid of it and they didn't shy away from it and they spoke into it. And I think you're doing that, and I think it's important to do is what we just said. We're trying to describe the indescribable and to help reach a different audience and use a different art form. I'm all for it. I think that's awesome, and I'm glad that you're doing it. So to that point, let's talk about the understanding of biblical myth.
yeah,
Most modern evangelicals become quite unhinged if you use the word myth or fiction in the same sentence of the Bible.
yeah.
We recently interviewed hailed Hebrew Bible translator Dr. Robert Alter, and he helped myself and our audience explore how the original authors and audience utilized the literary tool of myth and fiction to display historical truth. So, in the introduction to your book, you say, any division between myth and history is a modern idea that would have been foreign to ancient writers. But just such a division used to be common in biblical studies, such that the literature of the ancient Near East was placed firmly in the category of myth, and the Old Testament described in contrast as history. I love how you have that quote and you focus on how you set out at the understanding as a foundation of understanding this at a foundation of your books, like at the very beginning. And that's why I thought it was so important. So help us explore this important principle a bit more and tell us how the Hebrew Bible and ultimately the book of Job utilize myth to tell truth.
Yeah. Thank you. So first of all, to be explicitly clear, the Bible's not fiction. On every page, it shows a commitment to historical truth and historical accuracy.
Mm,
Second, the word myth we just don't have a better word in English. It's dangerous because, on the one hand, a myth means something silly or childish or obviously false. I'm not saying that about the Bible. However, if you get into like literary studies, and there's a whole subgenre of scholarship on myth theory, why do so many ancient societies, and why was it so entrenched in the ancient Middle East, to have these big symbolic narratives about order and chaos and how the world was, and so on. And if you really get into what's the right word? Fleshed out and well thought out theories of myth. People in the ancient Middle East did not think I'm not saying this very well. They used myth to talk about reality and truth and even historical truth.
Yes.
So in Sennacherib's, you remember Sennacherib from Isaiah 36 and 37, he invades Jerusalem. In his Akkadian account, I don't read Akkadian, but a friend of mine who does said that there's an echo to the Babylonian mythological text Enuma Elish about the defeat of chaos. That a historical text that has a lot of accurate historical stuff is using myth as a framework for making sense out of things.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I think if you give me my qualified definition of what a myth is, that it's talking about realities that we can, big realities of order and chaos that we can only talk about symbolically. We can't fully comprehend and grasp them. They're just beyond us. Then it's fair to say the Bible is mythic in the best sense of the word.
Yeah.
In that it is deeply true in multiple ways. True in the strongest sense of the word true. Let me stop there. More is coming to mind, but you talk for a while.
So I know what you're saying is right. And it's important for us to take the Bible on its own terms, because that's how we get the intended truth from it, because it is trying to give us accurate historical foundational truth about who God is, what's going on in the world, and all these things. But as we just talked about with Leviathan and some of these other Babylonian narratives that get kind of woven in even through the Psalms, that they can utilize these freely. And for a while inside, this was part of your quote that I liked, for a while inside scholarship, it was like we wanted to hold them separate for some reason. And we're I think returning back to understanding the beauty and art of biblical poetry and narrative and how they implemented all these things. So I'm glad that you brought it out of the foundation. Go ahead.
Modernity tends to separate what ancient peoples would combine.
Yeah.
It like reason versus faith, right? Or myth versus history or something like that. If I say the Bible is mythic, I'm saying it is true in the deepest, realist, hardest sense of the word true. And that if we had the eyes to see, we would see how beautiful and complex and sometimes terrifying and four-dimensional reality is and spiritual reality is. And myth is the best word we have in English to try to grasp that. It's just kind of an ambiguous one. And to me, that makes the Bible fascinating. I mean, I love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it's fiction, and it's intended as fiction. Everyone knows it is. But what if you had that wonderfully sweet, like tingling sense on the back of your neck of things too deep to put into words, but it was completely historically true, and every word is inspired, and so on. That's the best of all possible worlds. It just makes the Bible thrilling, I think. Yeah,
I agree with all that. And to that point, there's a very underlying basic question: what is the Bible? And I do wrestle with this all the time. Think about it, study through it. And I think it's at the core. This question sometimes gets overlooked, and then we just skip forward to looking at certain texts and things. And I wanted to just camp here for one quick second. I truly believe the answer to this question is at the heart of most modern evangelicals' misunderstanding for what the book of Job is, and ultimately what the Hebrew scriptures are. Because when we say the Bible, we're talking about the Hebrew scriptures right now. When Jesus said what the Bible and Paul quoted the scriptures, they're talking about the Hebrew Bible. Right now, we're going to talk about that. So personally, we enter into the story through Jesus. So we allow Jesus and his word to be the compass for how I interpret truth and the overall meaning of the Hebrew scriptures. I wouldn't even be connected with this book if it weren't for him. But like the Bible Project says, the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus. But Eric, this isn't to say that we import Jesus personally into every single passage of the Old Testament. But what it does mean is that the Hebrew scriptures at their very core and design were made to point towards the future revelation of a Messiah. This messianic hope and expectation is littered throughout the entirety of the Hebrew scriptures. So I have a clip prepared, but first, with that in mind, Eric, how would you answer the question, what is the Bible?
Yeah, what a great question, and what a tough question to answer,
Yeah.
right? Uh, this is not an adequate answer, but two things. First, you could say something like it's a divinely inspired prophetic narrative about God, creation, humanity, and redemption. Something like that is adequate. But I'd want to say something more. I don't want us to have Enlightenment modernistic sort of hermeneutical assumptions where you have the fully formed reader receiving information from the outside and sort of filtering it in and gradually changing. I want to say rather, instead of me reading the Bible and treating the text like an object, the Bible is a kind of world that is inviting me into it and re-narrating me
Yeah.
so that everything looks different. If that at all makes sense, what's special and magical and wonderful about the Bible, I just so want to stay away from isolated objective reader receiving information and much more God's story of redemption, and then we find we have a place in that story. Now, that's more how the Bible engages with us, but I hope it gets to a little bit more of what the Bible is. Tell me what you think, Jason.
No, I love that, and I mean, I agree with like what that's it's not just to enter into theological and whatever linguistic debates, but it's something that shapes who we are as humans. But where I'm going with this in my studies and understanding is it's like this. So I have a boat. I've got a little paddle oar in the back of it for if the engine fails, we can, paddle out of there. But my son, when we go to the beach, he takes the paddle out of the back of the boat and he uses it as a shovel, right? And, he doesn't know that it's, whatever, it's a paddle, he's using it as a shovel. And you can take this one thing and you can use it for multiple things, but what it's made for is to be a paddle. And I feel like the Hebrew Bible is that so often we can come to it and we're taking this paddle and we're using it as a shovel when it's like, hey, I'm a paddle. And that to that point, with all that said, the book of Job is not an isolated work within the Hebrew narrative or messianic hope, because this is what I believe the Bible is. The Hebrew Bible is pointing us towards our need. We always have a saying here at the channel that the beginning is near. And that's to point us to the fact that as we're reading through the Hebrew scriptures and the entirety of the Bible, that we're always supposed to be pointed back to the beginning in Genesis, in that garden moment. There's a lot of hyperlinks, as Tim says, or just connecting points that bring us back there. But what that's to say is that there's something that was laid out in Genesis that traces through the entirety of the narrative, that points us to our need of representative, of a hope, that later would be called this Messiah, this anointed one. And that's what, like, this was revolutionary for me, is that I never looked at the book of Job like that. So right now I got a clip that we'll watch from Tim Mackey, and then we'll discuss what the Bible is. Is it the oar or is it the shovel? We'll look at it together. How's it sound?
And in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, Jesus summarizes the entirety of the Hebrew Bible up into one sentence. And it's really remarkable. I don't know if you've spent any time reflecting on it, but it's right here. Then he opened their minds so that they could understand the scriptures, and he told them, this is what's written, and he's not quoting here, this is Jesus' summary. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. This is Jesus' summary of the message of the Old Testament. And the Old Testament includes the book of Job, doesn't it? This is Jesus' summary of the book of Job. 3 steps. It's really simple. The Messiah, God's chosen, favored one. You with me? That's step 1 of Jesus' summary. The Messiah enters into suffering and to death. But then out of death and through the other side, that Messiah is vindicated from suffering and death into resurrection life, and in what Jesus says, forgiveness and good news announced to all of the nations. In Jesus' mind, it seems so simple. It's like, just read it. It's interesting. Job fits the pattern to a T. It begins with God's righteous, chosen, favored one, blessed, right? Are you with me? I mean, it's actually, remember, the book has a 3-part structure. A prologue, dialogues, and epilogue. The prologue is all about highlighting Job's righteousness and his innocence before God. And yet, this righteous one that God calls his servant is handed over to unjust suffering, near death, huge outcry of protest and lament. And after all of that lament is complete, God vindicates his righteous servant, restores his life, and restores him to a place of blessing, and forgives his friends, who, interestingly enough, are from all the surrounding nations. Anybody? Well, that's interesting. The book of Job is trying to shake us awake. The world's not okay. But man, what if, here outside of Eden, we had somebody who would stare down the worst of human pain and suffering and maintain their integrity and surrender their lives before God? Man, what if someone like that came along?
What if is the question, and that was a great clip, and I love how it makes the connection. That's what we were just talking about. So before I say another word, tell us what connections the book of Job has to the overall narrative of the Hebrew Bible, and respond to that clip.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great clip. I like. Sorry, I just forgot that preacher's name. Remind me.
Tim Mackey.
Tim Mackey. Sorry, like Tim Mackey, it's very hard for me not to see Jesus as the ultimate Job.
Yeah.
I think that the book of Job is a window into how God relates to his world and what his relationship is to evil and suffering. The Friends have a very clear theory of that, and the book of Job undermines that. And it shows a man who innocently suffers what he thinks is the unjustified wrath of God to destroy the accusations of the devil and prove that a real relationship with God is possible and glorify God. And as soon as I say that, it's who does that remind you of in the New Testament? Jesus actually suffers the wrath of God, being innocent, to destroy the accusations of the devil, prove and demonstrate and give a way for us to provide a way for us to have a relationship with God and glorify God. So in terms of the big picture, we read Job on its own in the Old Testament to learn how does God relate to his world and what is his relationship to suffering and evil.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we see that God really puts his money where his mouth is. And as he asks us to trust him, God is the one who suffers most in the redemption of the world, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
That it costs, God has more skin in the game than anyone else. And it costs God more to redeem the world than any other human being, even what Job went through.
Yeah.
That's kind of the trajectory.
No, I love it. And I think that it's a both and, because there's no doubt, like the final form of the Hebrew scriptures that we call the Tanakh were put together by what Alter calls these arrangers, or these final editors that compiled that there's little stamps in between the books that lets us know that these, how these things were brought together. We have a good idea of when they came to their final form. And we know that the book of Job was written before it came into its final form. So my whole point is to say that, like, it has all those things that you're saying 100% I agree with, and it's trying to answer some of those deep theological questions that we all have and that come through. But as it's placed in this designed narrative and flow of the Hebrew scriptures, I think that they put it there as that stamp as well to show that. And that's why I said it's not an either or, it's a both and I think that's beautiful. So I don't want to cut you off. Anything else?
No, just that I completely agree with you, and it makes the Bible fascinating to read.
Yeah.
You used the word intertexts earlier, and the Bible does have that wonderful echoing effect. It's continually nudging you to read it in light of other passages in the Bible. And it creates this wonderful sort of multidimensional effect that's just great to read. And your analogy of a paddle as an oar or a
shovel,
whatchamacallit. Sorry, it's late in the week. My brain's not ready. That's a great analogy. And no one is saying that Genesis isn't historically true, but you need to keep asking, what is Genesis 1 trying to do, and what is it not trying to do? So anyway, sorry.
No, I agree with you. It's really utilizing it for what it's for. And I wanted to, it's understanding the things, and that's, it's taking Genesis for what it's for, not the shovel, to see it as a paddle. And in Genesis, and also in the book of Job, we have a mysterious character. And one thing that people get confused a lot about is, again, when we talk about the original authors, not even before the arrangers, the original authors, when they set out and wrote this, what did they have in mind with this mysterious character of the Hassatan or the Satan that comes in? So I learned a lot about this character from Dr. Michael Heiser, and we consistently feature a lot of his work on this channel. So you've already mentioned him. You gave some props to the book. I wondered if you just tell my channel, what are your thoughts on Heiser and his work?
Yeah, like Heiser, I like Heiser a lot. I'm really thankful for him. The kind of biblical studies happens in different forms, and the kind of biblical studies he's doing, inevitably, as he's drawing all these different connections. A couple of them, I think, I'm not quite convinced on that one. But my work is kind of the same, so other people might not be totally convinced. But I think he's done a real service to open our eyes to how fascinating the Bible is and God's world is, and especially on the divine council and Psalm 82 and the gods and so on. And it helps to show. I've been teaching the Bible for 19 years. I know I sound like a broken record with this, but my modern Western secular culture has really done me a disservice in reading the Bible well. And I think my African and Indian and Chinese and Korean brothers and sisters, I think they just innately, they just have more of the categories to really get what's going on there. So Michael, he's just so helpful for recovering some of that.
Yeah, for us as modern Western evangelicals, we need that. We really need that reclaiming of the supernatural form of the text. And I guess it's not even just that part of it, but maybe it's just taking our blinders off that we've really created to see the text, and he really helped me with that. But also, he was honest about. I do think we all like you said. There's things I disagree with Heiser on too. Like nobody's perfect. We've all got things, but I will say he was very thorough in his scholarly approach to these things. It wasn't just like he made claims. He put things out there. So to that point, I prepared a short clip from him going over the identity of this mysterious character, the Satan, in the book of Job for us to watch and then us to respond to. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Let's do it.
Sounds great.
So we have a meeting, a divine council meeting. The sons of God are assembled. And then in English Bibles, Satan, capital S, shows up. And that launches us into what happens to Job. It raises certain questions. Well, why is Satan there? Like, is he still working for God? Is he on the payroll? Like, what's going on here? And those are legitimate questions that we should talk about. The Satan figure in Job 1 and 2 really isn't the devil. Hebrew does not attach the definite article, that's the word the, in front of a proper personal name. Are we going to go with what the biblical text has or what our tradition tells us? So what we have in Job 1 and 2 is we have a member of the spiritual world, in this case sort of a functioning member of a board meeting. He's not evil and sinister. He's actually doing his job. Satan as a noun means adversary, that's true. But it could also mean something like challenger or someone who looks around for people who are obeying or disobeying God and then reports on them, where it sort of transitions from I'm doing my job to challenging or becoming adversarial in relation to God is when he questions God's assessment of Job. So he's questioning God's omniscience of the situation. He's also questioning God's integrity. Is God telling us the truth? In the Old Testament, this term is never applied to the enemy. As time goes on, in the intertestamental period, it occurred to someone, you know that serpent figure back there? He really was hostile to God and to humanity. He's God's adversary. He stood and opposed God. Let's use the word Satan to describe that dude. And by the time you get to the New Testament, this is 400 or 500 years later, it has become on its own a proper noun. So you get a figure who's named Satan. So you have capital S Satan running around doing stuff, and the New Testament associates that figure with the serpent of Genesis 3.
All right. lot of information to unpack there. But before I say anything, respond to that clip and tell us about the mysterious courtroom accuser, Hassatan.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to push back on Michael Heiser here a little bit. We're not worthy. He's great. Okay, but I'm going to push back. It's true that Hassatan is not a name. Ha in Hebrew is the, and Satan just means adversary or challenger. It can mean accuser as well. It's often used for human beings. David in the Psalms will say, "Deliver me from the Satans, the people accusing me." The angel that opposes Balaam, the word Satan is used for an angel that's clearly obeying God. So there is that. However, I don't think it's true to say that there's no hostility between Hassatan and Yahweh in Job. And I don't think it's true to say that the Satan is never presented as a hostile, evil figure in the Old Testament. If you look in Zechariah 3, it's pretty clearly an accuser there. The reason, now there are some commentators who say that the Satan is just like the opposition party in Parliament. He's sort of just making sure everything is in order and doesn't necessarily have hostile intent. I don't believe that for several reasons. First of all, when Job passes the first test in chapter 1, and then there's a second conversation between Yahweh and Satan, Satan says nothing about Job passing. Like, Job is amazing in chapter 1. Yeah. He buries his 10 kids, and it's Lord gave, Lord took away, blessed be his name. And Satan says nothing about that. If Satan is really only the opposition party, but basically wants God's kingdom to work well, you'd think he would say something like, you know what I mean?
I agree with you.
The charge is also completely unfair. The accuser can't find any problem with Job, so he turns Job's integrity into the problem. And there are other things as well. I don't find it convincing to say there's no hostility there. I don't think the devil actually cares about the quality of Job's relationship with God. I think he's just trying to make God look bad. Mm-hmm. He doesn't really care about Job. He's fighting against God. And if the Satan was essentially playing devil's advocate, if I can put it that way, with God, but basically had good intentions, I think he would have spoken and reacted very, very differently from how we see that. Yeah. Now, in terms of what ancient authors and audiences would have thought, it's true that you don't have the fully fledged demonology of the New Testament. I have to admit, I didn't like how Heiser, as I was watching the clip from Heiser, peace be upon him, I was kind of wondering, is the New Testament wrong? Did they just kind of make an arbitrary association? Yeah.
I get, yeah.
Whoever wrote Job wouldn't have had, they didn't have the New Testament, but they could have told there's a supernatural force that opposes God's plans and is trying to mess up God's work in the world, who is not bigger than God and has to obey God, but who's a lot bigger than human beings. They could have told that as much. And they would have had Hassatan as a job description. You know, they wouldn't have known as much as we know from the New Testament, but they could have told that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and I think that it's important. First off, that was a clip from Heiser, so like I'm with you. He's not right on everything, and even within that, I think that there's a little more agreement with what you're saying than what he said, because it's a clip, and I had to take some things out. But what I will say is that I agree with you to say that, like, you know, we enter into the story through Jesus. This is who we come through. Like, this is like how I enter into understanding these narratives. So the New Testament, the foundations that are laid in there, that's my compass for understanding these things. And I'm not, if they take something as a certain way, I'm going to lean towards that, because that's how I'm entering into the story. Like you said, I don't, like, honestly, Walton more than anybody is like just recently so dangerous with this that I'm like, what? You telling me Jesus and Paul got it wrong? Like, yeah. I'm sorry. No, like that, I can't see that way. Go ahead.
And also it means you get a Hassatan in the Old Testament who accuses innocent people and doesn't seem to really care about whether the accusation is true. And then you get Satan in the New Testament who's doing it. It's like, how are they not the same person? Yeah. Like, same job title, they're acting in the same way. We're multiplying entities beyond necessity to say there's no evil intentions in Satan and Job.
Yeah, and again, original authors of Job versus arrangers of the final form of Tanakh, and what the two different implications of those people had. Like, we're never going to be able to fully get in their mind, but I think, again, it's understanding that, like you're saying, there was a reason that they put that in there to point out this character for that reason, and I think it does give a little bit more weight or relief, I guess, if you will. Because it's like we still have all the questions in the Bible. It's like, we're theodicy. We're never going to not have this question. Why is he in the courts? Why does God allow the kids to be killed? How could he just be okay with the fact that I think I was just watching a clip from your brother Gavin Ortlund the other day. When it was talking about how Bart Ehrman was like, how could there be a God that just kills 10 kids and then gives them 10 kids and that's okay? I think we still wrestle with all those questions, but I think that it's important to see it as, yes, this is a hostile figure. This is not somebody that's just supposed to be there. This is if we trace the themes, the hyperlinks, and all the things, like you said, it's there. So I don't know if you had anything more to add to that.
Only that it's taken me way too long to appreciate how amazing the Bible is. And this is going to sound so silly. Like, if I say Beethoven's a good composer, everyone knows that already. Who cares what Eric thinks? But when I say the Bible's really amazing, the more you learn about the polytheistic pagan environment of the Bible, the more you realize how utterly revolutionary and amazing the Bible's vision of reality is. Just if everyone listening can take some time to imagine how utterly different your picture of the world and your religious life, your understanding of yourself and everything, how utterly different it would be if you thought there were many gods and no one God is supreme over all. There are many gods, some good, some evil. They can fight each other. They can kill each other. They can have kids with each other. Everything would look different. And for the Bible to say the divine nature is one, Yahweh is one, you have the divine council, which is completely subservient to him. There is rebellion in high places, and it's real, but that doesn't threaten God's rule. I think for ancient Israelites, their jaws would have been on the floor living in a pagan environment when they heard that for the first time. Yeah. And we're so far downstream from that. We've lost how brilliantly shocking and eye-opening that is. And it means in suffering, if you're in paganism and polytheism and suffering, it's like, well, the bad God got to me and my patron God wasn't strong enough, and I guess that's it. Yeah. But in the book of Job, you can go through horrendous suffering and God won't explain or apologize. And he's still big enough to worship and trust.
Amen.
Has there ever been another God like that in the history of human religion?
No.
It just blows my mind.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And I think that is a incredible segue to the central thesis of your book. Because in the introduction you say, and why do Behemoth and Leviathan take up so much space in the second speech? So we're talking about the second speeches of God to Job in the book of Job, where he brings up Behemoth and Leviathan, and you say they take up so much room. If these two creatures are as commonly understood as a hippopotamus and crocodile, in what possible sense is that a satisfying answer to Job? If I complain that I'm suffering and unjustly wronged, is it okay to answer, can you make a hippopotamus? No. It's also confusing that Yahweh says almost nothing directly about himself in chapter 38 through 41, but Job responds by claiming better insight, not into Behemoth and Leviathan, but into God himself. So what inferences has Job drawn from the complex poetry of chapters 38 through 41 that prompt such a change? So again, just to better ask that question, we see in the second speech of God to Job that he references Behemoth and Leviathan. And so many just kind of explain this way in different ways. But what your central thesis of your book says is that inside that proclamation from God, it's not a throwaway couple chapters. There's actually some meat there of hope that God's giving to us. So help my audience understand that.
Yeah. So I'm trying to stay calm as I talk about this. I don't know why this bugs me so much. There's a lot more importance. I could be getting really exercised over the theology of marriage, which is very contested right now, or something like that. I don't know why, but I'm shocked. I see, here I go. I'm shocked, genuinely surprised by how many really smart Bible scholars who have a lot of good things to say about Job just say hippopotamus and crocodile. And it bugs me because it's that simplistic two-tiered cosmology I was talking about earlier, where there's eternal reality, empirical reality. Behemoth and Leviathan are clearly not God. So it's just, well, what animal species is it? Mm. And I'm trying to read Job in terms of a three-tiered, like the mid-level spirituality, and say, this is the Bible's way of talking about powers and principalities, dark spiritual forces that rebel against God. Mm. That is such a helpful answer to Job, because as far as Job knows, it was just him and God. Job's just walking along one day, friends with God, minding his own business, and God drives a train through his life. Mm. So Job is trying to understand this, and he's going to try to explain it in reference to himself and fail. He'll say at the end of chapter 7, if I did something to make God mad, like, he's forgiven me in the past, why wouldn't he forgive me now? And if I did sin in some way, is that such a threat to God he has to kill my 10 children? So he says, no, I am not the problem here. And he starts to draw new conclusions about God's character. And he essentially says, God is not a good person. He's not the person I thought he was. I'm not safe around him. So when God shows up and talks about Behemoth and Leviathan, he is complicating Job's worldview. He's saying, Job, you thought either I was mad at you or you were mad at me. You thought let me back up. Job has been saying either I'm the monster that God is punishing or God is a monster. And Job will talk that way. And God is saying, listen, I'm not your enemy. You're not my enemy. Let me show you our mutual enemy. That suffering came from him, not from me. So in talking about Leviathan, God is giving Job a picture of the world where unexplained suffering can happen. And God is not angry at Job. Job did nothing to deserve it. And God is still a good person. All three of those things can be true in the same universe. Mm. And Job just didn't, because he doesn't know about chapter 1, he didn't have a way to have all those three things be true, and it drove him crazy because he really loves God. Mm. Is that tracking, Jason?
No, that's tracking, and I think it makes a ton of sense. And it's where taking the Bible and its ancient Near Eastern context is so important. If we talk to the original authors and audience, they're not going to be thinking crocodile or right, or hippopotamus. They have these themes in mind, and it's why the thesis of my channel is helping people recover the supernatural framework of the Bible. And the word supernatural, some people hate it, but listen, it's the best word I got for it. It's helping us reclaim that wonder and original intent that was put there to see that. Like, that's what I'm saying. There's so many of these Easter eggs, like through your book that I found and through other people's writings, that when you get connected with the ancient Near Eastern context that the Bible was written in, that you find these things that we normally just overlook and throw away are like vitally important to understanding the actual storyline and who God is. And
trusting him.
And trusting him, exactly. And trusting
a God who is glorious in warfare.
Yeah.
For him, the mountains shake. It's easier to trust a God like that, even when he doesn't explain himself.
Amen. So you have 3 literary sections of the thesis of your book on how the second speech from Yahweh should be seen as prompting hope. So I want to just go over one more of those. Preparation of the divine warrior. So I thought this was really cool, and we talked about this a lot within our series as well. Concerning the first of the 3 redeeming themes from God's speech to Job in chapter 40, you say, it can be easy for modern readers unfamiliar with this idea to revert to abstractions and explaining away Yahweh's radiant theophany from the storm in these texts and assume it's only a poetic way of emphasizing divine power. While God's power is on display in these passages, we must not miss how the theophonic display of his arm and voice shows not just divine power in a general sense, but his action both to save those who trust in him and to judge those who rebel. Eric, that's a absolutely beautiful quote and brings so much context into understanding and redeeming God's speech to Job. Expound on that for us and help us see how God's right hand is a promise and hope of vindication for the righteous.
Yeah. So good question. Several things. Often in ancient literature, before the gods go in literature outside the Bible, before the gods go to battle, there's the kind of training scene from the martial arts movies, where one god like puts on armor or gets weapons from another god or like goes out to battle, something like that. I understand Job chapter 40, I think verses 9 through 14 to be kind of the same. And I understand that to be a way of talking to limited, finite human beings in a way that will make sense to us, to say, your heavenly Father loves you so much and is so indignant to see you suffer. He will let you suffer. We know God, the way God runs the world. He does not jump in and save everyone from suffering. But after a time, after you've suffered a little while, in the words of 1 Peter 5, God himself is going to, the nuclear reactor is going to start to vibrate and hum and explode. And God, in a terrifying glory, is going to go to battle on your behalf. And he uses words like arm and hand, because we're embodied creatures. That makes sense to us, right? And you get the language of brightness and theophany to describe the terrifying, ecstatic vision of God going to battle to fight you. And by the way, there were lots of idol statues from the ancient world of a God with the right hand upraised and holding either a spear or a lightning bolt. They found like hundreds of metal statues like that. Often the spear is broken off. But so with an upraised right hand, when you get that phrase in Exodus or in Job, I think that's in the background. And it means God's going to war for you because he cares about you. And he's doing it in the most magnificent, intense, glorious, beautiful way possible. When God comes to save Job, when he's going to come to save us, he's not wearing jeans and a t-shirt. It's not 18th on his agenda. He's not being sloppy about it. It's in the most magnificent way possible.
Yeah. And I think as we trace that theme forward into understanding Jesus and the suffering that he entered into and the suffering that Job entered into, and then even, we talk about this on our channel a lot, that some people have an escapist mentality of becoming a Christian, and we think that God's going to just bring us away from all the suffering and disorder. But no, that's actually kind of the opposite of it. It's an inclusion into that suffering that is the badge of honor of being a follower of Christ. And it points to all of us understanding that God's saving us is suffering is a part of it. Right, that his righteous right hand of salvation, because Job just got smacked over the head and lost 10 children. I mean, all these things, these crazy things. And how is this a part of God's right hand saving us? Still the mystery remains, but that's where the hope of redemption comes in, and the trust for both Job to Yahweh and us through Jesus. So that was beautiful, man. As we move towards now the core principle of your book, we just talked about it with the theme of chaos and disorder as represented in the biblical character Leviathan. We've been going over this for months in my channel. That's why I'm so grateful to have this interview as a capstone, because your book was so influential for me. And the other part that was influential was the Bible Project. They have a really awesome, they just take their time and develop themes through podcasts, probably 6 months of podcast, just to produce a 2-minute video on themes that get things broken down. So I took their 2-minute video and shortened it down even a little bit more. Let's watch this, and I want to have you respond a little bit more and help us understand how interpreting Behemoth and Leviathan as symbols of cosmic chaos gives us ultimate hope and redemption from God's speech in Job. Let's check this out together.
In the ancient world, many cultures told stories about a monster of death that lurks in the deep, dark sea. In these tales, the dragon and the sea it lives in represent the chaos that threatens to drag creation back into nothingness.
The ancient authors of the Bible not only knew about these symbols, they also used them in stories and poems all over the Bible.
Really? Dragons in the Bible?
Yes. On the first page of the Bible, God brings order by separating the dry land from the chaotic sea, and there he contains the sea dragon. And this monster is connected to that dragon-like snake that confronts Adam and Eve in the garden, a spiritual being using the power of chaos and death to lure humans into their own self-destruction. In fact, entire empires can become like dragons. During Israel's exile in Babylon, the prophet Daniel has a dream about 4 monstrous beasts rising up out of the sea.
Whoa, mutant dragons?
They represent violent kingdoms in league with dark spiritual powers. But then, a new character appears, rising up from the land to sit beside God's throne, And as the dream ends, Daniel sees those monsters destroyed.
So who is this dragon slayer?
Well, Daniel calls him one like a son of man.
The Son of Man. That's what Jesus calls himself.
Jesus resists the dragon in a surprising way. He surrenders his life and willingly enters the belly of the beast.
Wait, the dragon slayer is slain by the dragon?
Well, that's how it seemed. But Jesus trusted in God's power to create new life on the other side of chaos and death. And he called his followers to confront the dragon in the same way.
I forgot I was in an interview just then.
I kind of did too. That was wonderful.
Yeah, I loved it. So before I say anything else, tell me about that clip. Tell me your thoughts on that clip.
I'm just going to agree with it and repeat what it said. Clearly in creation, Genesis 1 is about God organizing matter to create a wonderful, paradisical, lush, vibrant place where human beings can live. And it's about separating. This goes here, and there are these dividing lines. Old Testament wisdom literature strongly associates the physical order in creation and the moral order of creation, that God separates, holy from profane and so on, and you don't mix those or transgress that. But there are powers and principalities in the Bible's vision out there that resist that creational/moral order, that try to blur the boundaries or get people to transgress them. And the sea and monsters are a perfectly appropriate, not literal way to symbolize that. A big, dangerous snake is a great way to symbolize. It's not that snakes are inherently evil, but for human beings, that's a great way to symbolize that. Yeah. If you're an ancient Israelite, like, you've got this pretty strong sense of like regular agricultural time and, harvest time. And this is our ancestral plot of land and day and night and just orderliness of creation. And the sea, it's just this churning mass. There are no boundaries. You have no idea what's down there. It's dark. If you're an ancient Israelite, it might as well be bottomless. And every once in a while, some crazy, gloopy thing comes out. So it's not that the sea is evil, but it's a perfectly compelling way to symbolize this aspect of God's world.
Yeah, I love that.
So yeah, that's just me agreeing with the clip you just played.
Well, that's a beautiful agreement. So I wondered if now you could help us trace through that just a little bit to understand. In your book, one of the biggest themes that I just took away was understanding that, like, if we can see Behemoth and Leviathan as these chaos monsters, and the right arm, God's redeeming salvation that's coming through this, when God's speaking to Job, when him understanding those two creatures as these chaos and disorder, how does that impact the speech more?
Yeah, in many ways. It makes the speech coherent. It helps us understand why Job worships. It helps us understand how we can trust God when he lets something happen to us. And you're just thinking, if God had, I'm going to say something blasphemous. You see how Christians suffer? And sometimes it's hard not to think, I could run the world so much better than God. Like a 5-year-old could run the world better than God. Like the bizarre things that happen to Christians, and it gives us a way to disassociate, instead of just saying, well, God's just evil. It gives us a way to disassociate God and evil and keep God sovereign over evil and still good.
Yeah.
And ironically, Jason, I think a lot of the book of Job is showing us how seriously God takes us. That God does not put Job through a rinky-dink easy test. And in a way, in the Job speech, he says to Job, if you merely touched him, you'd never forget. It's like God is saying, Job, you thought I just clobbered you for no reason. You've actually been caught up in a war in heaven against an enemy so fierce. If you even saw it, you'd fall to the ground, much less just creep up and go touch. I mean, you'd just be so terrified. And that's your real enemy and mine. I'm not your enemy. That's the enemy over there. Leviathan is still loose, but there's coming a day I'm going to kill him. Now, will you trust me? There's something dignifying about God. There's something frightening and dignifying about God taking us that seriously.
Well, like you said in your quote,
He's not playing with monopoly money in the world. There's really a lot at stake.
Yeah, and Jesus is ultimate proof of that investing, of that real coin there. And it's like you said, though, like when you take the big chunk of what God says there with those 2 chapters, and then you look at Job's response, it makes so much more sense in light of all that for how that shift had taken, the character development that we see happen in that. Another thing that I actually this morning watched another sermon from you that you recently preached over the Psalms to a bunch of musicians, helping them, learn to understand how to sing lament and to be real about the suffering that goes on, and how the Psalms are just so open and vulnerable. And I feel like Job is taken in a narrative stance, has that same type of tone from the Psalms. And inside your book, you brought that out a lot too. And, as a Christian following Jesus, I just want to always be hopeful and like, oh, everything's going to be all right. But, man, sometimes it's not that simple, or even really that's the response that's there. So this isn't even on my notes, but again, I watched it this morning. I just wanted to just talk to you about it. Could you speak into that being okay in that emotion that the Psalms and Job give us permission?
Yeah. So, Jason, the psalmist believes something really crazy and weird. Do you know what it is? That God actually acts in history, and that the righteous Lord cares about the widow and the orphan. So when the psalmists see the widow and the orphan being oppressed, they are shocked and offended that God has not done anything. And if I'm not shocked and offended as the psalmists are at the injustice I see in the world, then that may be because my belief in God is too theoretical, and I need to be more shocked. And shockingly, the Psalms of Lament show us that when we take a problem, lay it before God, and say, God, this is your problem. Act, rise up, do something. Shocking. And when we use strong language, God looks at us and says, you just honored me with that prayer. There are things in the Psalms of Lament I would never let my kids say to me. I'd say that's rude. Say that better. God, surprisingly, God wants us to engage with him in that way. And obviously, you can use the language of lament, and it can be a blasphemous, faithless prayer. The difference is that the psalmists really trust God, whether he acts or not, and they really deeply believe that he is the righteous Lord. And so when they don't, and they expect that to be obvious in the world, and when it isn't, they say, Lord, let your kingdom come, essentially.
Yeah, and I think Jesus' prayer model is like, I'm glad you brought that up, because as I was listening to your sermon, which, by the way, I feel like you are a very gifted speaker. You're a great writer.
You're paying me so many compliments.
I'm being real, man. Goodness. I don't interview people.
I have such a big head.
Listen, the Lord will take care of his side, but I'm doing mine. I only interview people that I've really dug their stuff, and I really do think you're good at uncovering that, and your sermon really helped me see that like, we need to embrace those moments, because actually, the world is not okay. Like we anesthetize and desensitize ourselves to so many things. And I'm talking about myself, and sometimes when I'm out there in the service of others, God opens my eyes to be like, man, it's not okay. Like there have been multiple times I have friends that we serve with in a homeless ministry that I'm like, God, what is up with this? Like, how can this be? Yeah. And like you said, there
are things that God lets happen. I'm so sorry.
No,
Jason.
don't. We're friends.
I'm so sorry. There are things that God lets happen to people that I would never, ever, ever let happen to my children if I could at all stop it.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't, can I be really blasphemous? What kind of heavenly father lets one of his children be sexually abused as a child when he could step in and stop it?
Yeah.
If that doesn't shock and trouble you, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so Job and Laments are speaking to this. I'm very sorry I interrupted. Please continue.
You didn't. And one thing that I'm just talking out loud to you now, these are Zoom conversations, meaning like we're not in person. And that's why I love that, like when you have something, think and say it. Like this is me and you are talking as friends, and I'm glad that you did just say that, because it doesn't make any sense. And, I go back to the beginning. Again, the beginning is near. We need to constantly go back to that story. It's there at the beginning for a reason. Every time I started reading the Bible when I first discovered Jesus, people were like, start in 1 John, read this over there. I'm like, why would you not tell me to go to the beginning of the book? At the beginning of the book, in the garden, is a snake. God, even the phrase of knowing good and evil in Hebrew is an old phrase of coming to age, of when a child no longer is a child no more. They know good and evil, so that it's like they're no longer children. So there's this whole plot to show that these are two innocent children before God, and yet there's this deceptive, crafty snake that's there. And just like you said, Eric, like, I have 2 kids. I'm not going to put them in a sandbox with a snake, right? Like, what's going on? So that's the tension that I think that when we come to Genesis 3:15, when we come to the messianic hopes and expectations that are kind of laid throughout, that God's trying to telling us the world is not okay. My right arm is coming to save you from the unjust suffering that is coming. But it's not going to bring you out of it in the moment. It's going to bring you through it to something that we couldn't ever realize before. And it's that trust of, like Moses walking through the fire to go up to Mount Sinai. It's that same trust. Like Jesus even said it, we're all going to be salted with fire. I hate to upset anyone else's plans, but this is what Jesus said. We're all going to go through that moment. And it's trusting God through that ultimate suffering that brings us through the other side. Doesn't make sense. I ain't putting my kid in the garden, like you said. I'm with a snake. I'm not going to allow my kid to be sexually abused. It doesn't make sense. And Jesus, the only answer that he gives to us is that it also does not make sense to God. And I'm getting like loud, but hopefully like the passion's coming out for a good reason. So I don't know if you want to respond to that, but it's
And in a way, I find it just puts steel in my spine, Jason. I find it so dignifying that God would look me in the eye and say, yes, sometimes I'll put my kids in a sandbox with a snake, or let horrific, it's just like 2 + 2 is 5 kind of stuff. Like if every suffering, if every kind of evil clearly led to, and obviously and immediately led to, a greater good, well, fine, that makes sense. Now, I do believe that all suffering leads to a greater good. But when God lets people go through these extreme, bizarre kinds of suffering and looks us in the eye and says, I am a good person. I care about all of this. I see everything wrong. I'm not being, criminally negligent, and I expect you to trust me without an explanation. It's like God is pushing me to either really hate him or really bow in worship and say, okay, you don't owe me an explanation. I'm going to trust you anyway. And I'm in this great drama of going through suffering into the redemption of all things. And I guess I have to trust God, because God has more skin in the game than any of us. Jesus, the human being, suffered more than any other human being in the history of the world. Yeah. So if God's willing to do that, then I can suffer too and trust him without explanation, and look forward to that great day when he scours every last bit of evil from his world. Like, wow, I want to be a part of that story. It's terrifying. But God is not messing around with us, and he's not patronizing us or talking down to us. It just makes me want to stand tall when I think about it that way,
Yeah. Amen, brother. I say it all the time. If it weren't for Jesus, my Friday nights would look a lot more sinful. You know what I mean? Yeah. Just because it doesn't make sense. He really brings a lot of compassion, empathy, understanding to these moments that don't have any of that, because God did enter into the story. He didn't abandon us. And, that's the hope. That's why I recommend your book, Piercing Leviathan. I recommend anything that you do, because you, like I said, man, you're a talented artist at what you do, whether it's preaching, teaching, writing. You're a great communicator. So before we go, though, do you have anything that you're working on? I wanted to just give you a chance to kind of give a shout out, like anything that you got going in the grinder behind scenes. What are you working on?
I'm trying to write a book on Isaiah and multiple authorship stuff, which I don't like and don't agree with, and interrogate that. I am working on fiction. I'm trying to retell King David's story in kind of like Lord of the Rings, as like a big fantasy epic. I have no idea if it'll ever go anywhere. But before we go, Jason, can I make an appeal to any artists who are listening, any writers or musicians or movie makers? Please. We need like really great art. And if there are any musicians or writers or painters or movie makers or anything, God bless you, and please do as much as you can to, if I were not a Christian, I'd still love C.S. Lewis. I still would. And man, you've got such an opportunity to speak to I'm not reducing art to a utilitarian value, but to get the multidimensional beauty of the Bible and of the gospel across to secular people. There's so much potential. So please, if you are an artist, Christian artist in any way, I'm not asking you to make Christian music or something like that, but to awaken, but to try to communicate these unspeakable things. God bless you if you're an artist.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's a great point, because that's where we're all. I mean, I've been to so many churches to where the music ministry or the art is the way where I connect with God more than the sermons. And that's not to say that there's just bad preachers. It's just that art is a very valuable tool that God has given us to see the multifaceted beauty that he contains. And your books do that. So to my audience, thank you for watching with us. Check the notes. I'm going to have links to all of Eric's work down there. It's been an absolute pleasure, Eric. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for the work that you put in, that you continue to put in. Thank you for standing out, because there's a lot of people that just follow a narrow path in scholarship. And, listen, we need those too. But I'm like Heiser and so many others. I appreciate the people that step out into what they feel God calling them to do. And I pray that the Lord would honor that and continue to bless your ministry for what you do. So thank you for being here, brother.
Thank you. I'm very humble. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for your ministry too. Thank you for what you're doing. This is important. This really matters. And it matters to God as well. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. Will you close us in prayer?
Yeah, absolutely. Lord, we want to say a lot of thank yous. Thank you for covering us with the blood of your Son. Thank you that you really are trustworthy no matter what, Lord. Thank you for my new friend in the faith. Thank you for the technology that makes this possible. Sorry. Lord, will you arouse and awaken us to your beauty, the beauty of your word, the beauty of your world, and this frightening, amazing adventure of redemption through suffering. Give us courage, Lord, and joy as we walk through this adventure, and help us to call others into this drama as well. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't. And as always, stay tuned. The beginning is near. We are out.
When God's righteous servant is willing to surrender everything and go into suffering that is unjust and undeserved and cry out on behalf of the many before God, God hears the prayer of his righteous servant, and forgiveness is released to the nations. Notice that all of the nations that his three friends are from are highlighted right at that moment in the story. Are you guys with me? So the book of Job is not designed to answer our questions about the problem of evil. The book of Job is designed to do what the whole of the Hebrew Bible is designed to do, which is not to give us an answer, an intellectual answer that we can tuck in our pockets and walk away feeling good about the world, because we shouldn't be feeling good about the world. We live outside of Eden, you guys. It sucks out here. We're dying. You're dying. Do you know that? I'm dying. It's terrible, actually. It's not okay what happens out here. And, all the ways that we anesthetize ourselves, with our devices and creature comforts. And it's just, the book of Job is trying to shake us awake. The world's not okay. But man, what if here outside of Eden, we had somebody who would stare down the worst of human pain and suffering and maintain their integrity and surrender their lives before God? Man, what if someone like that came along? The last sentence of the book of Job is that he dies. And you're like, okay, well, I thought it was going to be him. But, right, if anybody was going to do it, it'd be the book of Job. And the melody continues. Are you tracking with me? When Jesus talked about the book of Job, he wasn't just talking about an interesting set of stories about the past. And he wasn't just summarizing like, hey, isn't this cool, this thing I just did over, Passover weekend here in Jerusalem. It just happens to match one or two prophecies in the Old Testament. What he's saying is that the whole thing's about him. Like the whole thing is about him. Job is Jesus. Are you tracking with me? And what I mean when I say that is Job is one among the whole mosaic of characters in the Hebrew Bible that is trying to tell us what's wrong with the world, about what's wrong with us, about the kind of place that we're living in, and what's the way out here? And every cycle of the melody just keeps focusing in on one solution. Man, if we just had one human who actually didn't listen to the snake, who actually didn't give in to the desires and the creature comforts that get us all to compromise and redefine good and evil by our own wisdom and our own eyes. Man, what if someone like that came along? And it's like the Hebrew Bible gives you the silhouette, and Jesus of Nazareth just walks right into it. That's what he's saying. And so the story of Jesus, the Hebrew Bible, it doesn't give us an answer to the things that we wish the Bible would speak to, which is why. But what it does tell us is what God is doing about human suffering. Because God's response was a person. God's love become human, to become the righteous intercessor that you and I all could be, but we just perpetually fail to be. And Lord, have mercy upon us. And he has. That he has sent the one righteous intercessor who is the greater than Noah, the greater than Abraham, and the greater than Job. And so for my journey with the book of Job at this point in my life is I want Job to become my brother and my teacher, to teach me how to lament, to teach me how to become intolerant towards the tragic evil and suffering, and to take my confusion and my despair and my anger and to pour it all out before God, trusting that the suffering and the victory of Jesus over death is the solution to the riddle in ways that I can't possibly comprehend.